This is Dominican Republic. Welcome to Dominican Republic. Un fuerte aplauso para todos ustedes por estar aquí. A big hand to all of you for being here to kick off this meeting. Quería recibirlos. It's a pleasure to host you, and we would like to give you a warm welcome to this lovely country. And I'll be joining you over the course of this session.
Junto con Antonis, lo voy a estar acompañando.
I am going to be with you in this first segment where we're going to be talking about civil society. And we have representatives from different organizations of civil society and different stakeholders. We send a warm greeting and a special thanks to those organizations that have taken part in the events leading up to this meeting, and also those connected with us over live stream. And as was just said, we have different organizations of civil society and different stakeholders. I wanted to mention some of those that are with us. We have foundations, NGOs, we even have universities and organizations of indigenous peoples, as well as organizations of Afro-descendants, people working with LGBTQ populations, others working with persons with disabilities. That is true, Anthony. So we support development. We work with sectors that are key. For example, digitization, labor conditions, transparency, climate change, and also the inclusion of groups in situations of vulnerability. Before we get started, we wanted to share some practical announcements. Please identify the emergency exits from this room. Our official hashtag is BID Reunión Anual. Just so you know, we're going to have simultaneous interpretation in all of the seminars. If you require interpretation, please ask for them outside. Also, we have microphones that are available for your questions. So, Anthony, please go ahead, and please, a warm round of applause to welcome Ilan Goldfajn and Anabel González, who is Vice President for Countries. Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? It's great to see everyone here. Okay. That means that was 11 years ago, and only last year, when we assumed the presidency, we had time to invite some of you, but very few, because we were short on time. And now you are part of this annual meeting. And the annual meeting, I think, is historic. It is an annual meeting that we feel is going to transform the IDB. And fortunately, in this way, we feel that we will also be transforming the region. For the first time, we are going to have three major transformative changes. We'll have a new institutional strategy, that is where we want to head in 2024. You know that our development objectives are for 2030, and there We also have many reforms that are going to change the bank. Our relationship with civil society is a case in point. We're also going to have a greater capitalization, a new business model for IDB Invest, and that is going to produce major changes. It will double the size of IDB Invest, and we will have a new capital replenishment for IDB Lab, so as to provide it with a more sustainable business. So this meeting, which has you participating after so long, is a very important one. And I think that it will be remembered for many years, or perhaps even many decades. As I said, one of the changes is our relationship with civil society. We want to make a major change in the way that we work with you. And that's why I deeply appreciate your being here today. Thank you for your time, for your efforts, because I'm sure that together we will engage in a more profitable partnership. So by working together, we create a win-win situation because we can all be more effective, and in that way we can accomplish our joint objectives. That is our strategy, to work with you. And that strategy focuses on what is truly important: operations, projects, knowledge, programming. So you are a key partner for what we consider to be the most important things. We want you to keep us informed, also focused, and help us work in a disciplined fashion. So you are here not just because we think it is good to have you here. You're here because we need you. We need to hear from you, and you can be assured that we are going to be learning from your comments. We have a framework for civil society within the IDB group, and this is forward-looking. We want to increase the span of representation of civil society, and we seek greater interaction with the bank. It's not a matter of having one thing or another. For us, it's important to see such a full room because we think that this framework of work with civil society needs to be transparent. Transparent as we are in our work. And here I'm thinking of both the public and the private sector. We need you to help us design this strategy, formulate this framework for civil society and its work with the IDB. This is important not only to improve our dialogue, but also to increase equity and the legitimacy of development across the IDB group. If you have heard that before, you know that we have been talking a lot about impact and effectiveness. We want you to participate in developing country strategies. We need to know what you think of the strategy. We want you to be involved working with our country offices. We have 26 country offices in 26 countries. So we need you to interact with those country offices. We can see, for example, now here you're involved in our annual meeting. And today's meeting is the result of this new approach. It's a first step. And we have prepared not only this greater openness, but we are prepared for further steps in the future. Today's meeting is a follow-up on some meetings that we had last year in the United States with some of you, and now we are opening this up for participation by others. The new approach is important, and it will help assure the success of designing new programs. For example, and you already heard this, we have Amazonia Forever, we have One Caribbean, these are new initiatives, and we have other regional projects like America in the Center, América en el Centro. We have regional projects, and there we want you to also be engaged. In the Amazon region, natural resources are especially important for more than 42 million indigenous peoples living in the region. And it has been estimated that the Amazon jungle has an estimated value of $317 billion per year. Now, we have a project that favors organizations that group indigenous populations and their communities, as well as Afro-descendants and traditional peoples. The idea is to strengthen the capacity of organizations to design and execute projects. We are supporting organizations like COICA in the Amazon, COICA being the Coordinator of Indigenous Organizations of the Amazon region. So the idea is to boost the capacities of local communities, and we hope to be able to work in the field during the implementation of all of these projects. This new approach also helped us identify emerging concerns regarding food security in some countries. And this is one of the top priorities in our institutional strategy. A large number of stakeholders currently interact regularly with the bank in areas of their specialization. This compared to the past, where we repeatedly involved the same groups from civil society in our projects. There are new channels, new ways of influencing bank activities, including a direct interaction with our specialists and our country offices. So this new framework includes, one, interaction with our technical people, also working in our working with our country offices, local strategies, and partnerships. And we think that that is what we can develop working with you. I know that our relationship of IDB with civil society will improve under the bank's current administration. We need to work with you because in this way we can better serve the populations that we support. By working together, we can do a better job. And that is why we are injecting new efforts into our relationship. And you can see that now that we have this opportunity to exchange views. So I am looking forward to today's conversation, and I look forward to hearing your comments. And with that, I invite Anabel González, Vice President for Countries. She is here with me, and we will now begin our conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. A few weeks ago, we began a process working with civil society to invite civil society to submit questions for the president. And we received several questions. And now, Mr. President, I would like to share some of those questions with you. The first question comes from Leonardo Tripa from Indian Law Resource Center. And the question is the following one. And it comes from the work done by the Indigenous Law Center, and that has to do with the work they do. What measures are being adopted by the IDB group to stop deforestation in the Amazon? to protect its biodiversity, contribute to legal certainty in the indigenous lands, and eradicate poverty from these communities. Well, I did mention in my beginning remarks that some of that is addressed by Amazonia Forever. So this is a program that is an umbrella for several programs that we are implementing. It is a program that has 5 objectives. We are not dealing with just one pillar, which was stopping deforestation. This has to be a holistic problem where the second idea is to work. It's not by coincidence that we have the support of COICA, where we have a contact with the community that we are trying to serve by working with indigenous communities, with Afro descendants, and with original peoples. We think that the work in the Amazon has to involve working with people and getting jobs for these people. People have to be provided with education, with health. This is a holistic problem. And for the first time, we are addressing all of these components. We have many examples of how we're working, not only working with COICA. There are also projects. There is a project, for example, by the COP30 meeting will be held in the state of Pará. It will be held in Belém, the capital, and we have a program of working with communities by providing them with resources to pay them for their services. We have projects where we will have tokens that will represent carbon credits. That too is important. We have other programs that address languages. For example, in Salvador, we have programs that work with financial networks. We have the Green Coalition that is going to be investing resources in small and medium-sized enterprises. That means jobs. We have a network of private banks that have committed to work on this project. We have agreements with BNDES in Brazil to finance to the tune of 1 billion. So we are addressing all of this in a holistic way. I believe, and I'm very encouraged because I think that the effort is gaining momentum. We also are working with the United Kingdom. We have a signed agreement with Italy. Now at year end, we signed that agreement. Also with France, we have another agreement. That means that countries are stepping forward, and we can work on this holistic approach by working with the different countries on these projects. And also we have financial instruments available. There's talk of debt for nature swaps. That too supports nature. So this means we're swapping debt for nature. And in the Amazon, what we intend to do is, by working with the World Bank, we want to have Amazon bonds. What do we mean? What do we mean by issuing bonds? That means that these resources will be earmarked for these projects. So we are dealing with a project that has tremendous scope. It is going to have the impact that we need. So right now, I am very encouraged. I think that by working together, we can make good progress. So this is an important question. I had sort of addressed it in my initial remarks, but this question gives me the opportunity to speak more about what we're doing. Thank you, Mr. President. You did hit on the high points. It's a holistic project, we have innovative financing mechanisms. Then there's another question having to do with the energy transition and renewable energy. This is something that is of great interest to the participants. And it is Javier Barbaro González from IDA who says the following: how can you make certain that the IDB is going to finance projects that encourage a just energy transition within the region? Well, that is a very important debate. You know that the energy transition to deal with climate change has consequences. And that is why we look not just at climate. Climate change is one of the main objectives of our institutional strategy. You're going to see it on the list. So we have both adaptation and mitigation to climate change. This is tremendously important. But to say it's an objective, it's not only a matter of saying it. We have to look at what we're actually doing. And that is revealed in our country's strategies, in our projects. We have several projects that deal with this. Our projects are being aligned with the country objectives. Not only do we have a methodology that we have announced, we call it PAYA, and it looks at each and every project to see if it's aligned. And if it's not aligned, we will align it. And I am happy to be able to say that we were the first multilateral bank to be able to announce that we are 100% aligned and that all of our projects are aligned. So what projects are we talking about? Let me give you a couple of examples. First, RELAC. RELAC is renewable. It is a project that is a network of ambitious projects that deal with climate. And the objective is to reach 70% of clean energy by 2030. 70% is a lot. Why do we do this? Because today we need that. We need that to assure the transition, but also because what we see is that energy, renewable energy, is actually cheaper. Its price is going down, and that is very helpful. Let me give you another example, green hydrogen. I get the impression that green hydrogen is gaining momentum because there is demand. People want green hydrogen, something coming from a clean source. For example, Chile has an agreement with Europe about what we're doing, and we created a project of $400 million for green hydrogen, and precisely that is the purpose. We work with 14 countries so as to be able to deliver the stamp of quality on these projects. So we have to see this transition as an opportunity to create more jobs. One thing that I have told the world is that what we have here is an opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean. It's an opportunity, and we have to make good use of it, because I think that we are at a turning point where the transition can lead to greater growth and more jobs. So what we need is to be prepared. I think that you can help us with this readiness. People have to have these capabilities. We need projects like what we have in Barbados, where we are working with education, and we're educating with the energy transition in mind. So we have to take the steps so that the communities will be ready for this transition. This is not only a challenge, not only is it a milestone, it is a challenge, and we all have to work together to make sure that this will be a turning point for communities and will assure greater growth. Thank you very much. Another very interesting thing, another question we have is citizens and democratic development. And there is a question here. about connecting areas of another network. And the question is, how can the IDB group help strengthen citizenry so as to assure greater democratic development in Latin America?
Well, first, by doing what we're doing here, it's about engagement, participation, listening to you. With the offices, with the annual meetings, listening to you. That is about democratizing, about enhancing civic engagement. This meeting here is historic. It's novel. Look at 2013, and it was a far cry from this. So what we're doing is putting in place a new framework and taking a new step, which is about democratizing effectively and about fostering participation. You need to participate in design. So we know what is needed, but we need to listen to you. And then, of course, there's transparency as the second point. What we do at the bank is transparent throughout, and the relationship with you needs to be transparent too. And that is part of this event. Once we leave here, we need to stop just talking and have a panel, as we will do, on transparency, which will give you a chance to see about accountability, how you can talk, and the specialists and civil society representatives will tell us about that. And finally, as we talked about, the major programs, Amazonia Forever, One Caribbean, America en el Centro is already in Spanish. That's what it's called. As Hortas in Portuguese, that's the other one I've translated. We need your help, the help of all of you for that. So democratization is about transparency, your participation throughout, and that's what we're doing now. We're starting, and that is a good bridge for us to open up to more questions. Perhaps, Anabel, you might want to take questions from the audience, from the people here, whatever you think. I think we have a very large audience, and it would be great to hear questions from our audience here. I can see Fanny from COICA. Please go ahead. Good morning, Mr. President and Madam Vice President of the IDB. Thank you for those inclusive, high-impact comments on what society needs. And I would like to ask this question. Over the course of 65 years of its existence, what is it that now drove you to work on bioeconomy with indigenous peoples, considering the history of the IDB, and how will you work on that differential ethnic approach to make sure that we can conserve and protect the Amazon region? Thanks, Fanny. Well, we are sharing quite a few panels. We have spent time together. Thank you for your concern, and we have been working quite a bit with COICA, which is very important to us. Now, if you ask why this is important, why we conceived of this work after so many years, 65 years of existence of the bank, why now? Well, when I came into office, I was presented with a program, an Amazon initiative, and they said, in order to work on Amazonia, you can't work by imposing things or thinking very rigidly. You know, it's not just about changing things from the outside because we want to change it. You need to respect the culture of the people. What people do in the bioeconomy is right from the bottom, and based on that, looking at what people do, we'll be able to protect the Amazon region and nature. Now, honestly, this was not just my own idea. Actually, I represent the group, and I'm going to call on Tatiana. Why don't you join us? Come and sit over here. I can assure you she knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. So please, take a seat. She will give you all of the answers to all questions from now right until the end. Well, starting with the question on fighting deforestation, one of the most effective ways of fighting deforestation is by pursuing economic activities that see the rainforest as a source of economic potential and divert economic interest away from other groups that cause deforestation. So that's part of the answer. And what else? What else do we do? We also support national governments in plans to combat deforestation, as this is a broader issue than just working with indigenous populations. It's about working on all aspects of society. We also look at ways to optimize urban productivity, because urban issues are also indigenous issues. It's also about fighting deforestation, about protecting the rainforest, about conservation. So the IDB sees the Amazon region as strategic to the region, to South America, and to the world as a whole. And that gives you an opportunity for joint work, considering the different levels and scales and people in the region. It's a long-term major challenge, but we have started, as the President and Vice President have said, we have already started. We are already undertaking major efforts and seeing significant achievements as well in the Amazonia community. The Amazonia Fund for Life, among others. Well, we are working to strengthen the indigenous economy, also with CONAF, with Brazilian Afro-descendants. We're also working with Venezuela, with CPI. I knew you would have all of the details. But the fact that Tatiana is here is not just to answer and say what we're doing on the ground, but also to offer transparency so that you know who the person is, where they are. You see her here, you know who to talk to, because talking to me may be very important, but it's not enough. You need to talk to the people on the ground. You need to the people who are there. And in the case of Amazonia, it's Tatiana and the whole group that's offering support. It's a very large group. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tatiana. Again, I see another question coming up. Please go ahead. Good morning, Mr. President. I'm Catarina Escobar. I'm from Macaya, an organization dealing with technology and innovation for social change. And we have seen firsthand the barriers and gaps around technology and digital infrastructure. I would like to know what the IDB is doing or intending to do to close these infrastructure gaps, especially considering infrastructure not just in terms of connectivity, cabling, and access, but also in terms of the skills people need in order to leverage the access and technology to unfold and unlock their full potential. Thank you. Yeah, digital, that's very important. It is an objective we have in several countries and programs, but it is also a goal in Europe within the EU. Digitalization is something that they are supporting. And of course, the resources in a region are very important. You talked about cables, you talked about connectivity. We are working on connectivity in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are doing a connectivity mapping. And the other day, I signed a Connect-a-Lac agreement. It's about coming up with a map and working together. It's very important at this point. And we also need to work on the people side. We have projects that are, for example, the Women in Tech project. It's these are ways to work together with IDB Lab and other parties to come up with solutions and offer innovations as part of that. So on the one hand, we have major connectivity projects, and on the other, projects for innovation in countries conceiving of new solutions. And finally, something you mentioned has to do with training. We need to step up training and technical assistance, and we have been working and increasing resources, and I thank our board that has given us a lot more resources, almost 50% more by way of technical assistance to provide precisely assistance. And part of that goes into digitalization. Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Another question from our audience here. I have 3. Wow, I've got quite a few more. So 1, 2, 3, and then the second round. Why don't you just take 4 so we have enough time? And then I'll come back to that side over there. So off we go. Good morning. Good morning. I represent a company that is the main GovTech in Brazil, SoftTech, and we handle digital transformation for government, the public sector, and the judiciary. We work with justices of the peace and digital transformation. And of course, I would like to, considering the IDB and other entities as well, the issue of impact is key in order to have the sorts of achievements that we are discussing here. And of course, technology adoption for project follow-up is key, along with executing agencies. Now, what I would like to ask is how the IDB is strengthening or fostering technological adoption, since the idea would be for executing agencies in countries to adopt technologies to measure impact and follow up on the projects. What's your name again? Leonardo. Leonardo, thank you very much. And we had a second question here as well. Good morning. Rafael Escudero is my name. I speak for the Spanish Committee on Development Cooperation. We have a network working with the LAC region and engaging in many progress. Many things have already come up, but there's a specific pillar, which is equality and, of course, diversity, gender, mainstreaming. And we would like to know how the IDB group includes the mainstreaming of gender and identity into its operations. It's a challenge because many entities working internationally, such as ours, would like to make progress. And it's great to, of course, open up to civil society so as to build not only on steps for economic progress, but I think we can agree that without real ongoing equality, it would be like having a lame duck. And I would like to know how you implement the concept of equality, gender equality, within the operations and how that will unfold as part of the strategies that are being discussed. Thank you for that question. And we had 2 questions over there. One here, one there. If you can please give us your name. Good morning, Mr. President and Madam Vice President. I'm Maria Gallardo from Peru. And I would like to ask the President whether you have any specific plans to work with Afro-descendants, for instance. In Peru, we are working very hard against discrimination, racism, and gender-based violence. I am a member of a network of Afro-descendant artisans, which also includes Andean people and Amazonian people, and there's issues like deforestation, illegal trafficking, illegal mining. Thank you very much. And one last question for now. We will have a second round, though. Go ahead, please. Yes. And we'll come back to you. Eric González from Mexico. I'm a member of a civil society organization, Puntadev, we focus on advanced technologies and art. The idea is to have a commitment to fund 50 women in the region, and the idea is to have annual funds being granted. Basically, my focus is on how to address the needs of the region as a whole. And we have a wide range of questions, Mr. President, here. I think before handing it over to you, I can also talk about monitoring and technology, and we also have the CEO of IDB Lab, who might also share a few perspectives with us. Yes, Irene is our IDB Lab CEO. IDB Lab for you. You know what I suggest? Why don't we take the last question so that Irene can address that, since it refers to IDB Lab. Go ahead. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Regarding the possibility of funding these 50 businesses you talked about, on the one hand, we as IDB Lab and Innovation and Venture branch of the IDB Group, we can invest directly, but we can also invest through the over 50 venture capital funds in which we participate. And we extend open invitations every year to include more funds in the portfolio. We had over 100 applications in the last quarter, and those would be channels to fund the ventures. But it's not just about the finance. There's also the expertise, the networking, the enabling conditions, depending on the particular sector that is being pursued. So we could have a meeting later and see what other actions could also be undertaken in cooperation with your organization. Thank you. Thank you, Irene. Mr. President, we could talk about technology along those lines and give an answer to Leonardo. First of all, the President talked about our new institutional strategy. As part of that, we will have new country strategies. And one bit of news is strengthening the monitoring capacities of executing agencies and of our partners. And technology obviously has a key role to play. We'll be building on the basis of a major tool we have, which is the smart portfolio that seeks to intensify our monitoring capacities in real time. But of course, if you have any interesting ideas to share with us, we can have an exchange after the event. I'll hand it over back to you. I would like to go back to Leonardo's question, the first one, on impact. The institutional strategy is about transforming for impact and scale. Scale is about doing more. But doing more means nothing unless there is impact to be had. And how do we achieve impact? First, we need to work better. It's about a reform in development effectiveness, as part of which we'll work on processes. We'll work to make sure that we have strategic selectivity, which is about focusing on the things that matter. So we'll see how we can offer support to projects, not just about the authorizations and approvals, but it's about the whole project cycle, and we have ways to do that. But Leonardo, you mentioned something very important. Executing agencies, countries, clients. We need to work on training in order for projects to succeed, and that's quite clear to us. But if we work on the basis of reform from inside and also from outside inwards, we will achieve impact. Impact we will not achieve in just a single day. We won't be able to change all things. But as I've said all along, if we're patient and we are persistent and we stay focused, we will get there. And that is what matters most to us. There has been quite a lot of talk about civil society. Well, in Spain, several issues have been highlighted, but I would like to focus on gender equality and how we are dealing with that, since that is important. First of all, we need to deal with this within the IDB, but also outwards, because if we don't deal with it adequately inside, we won't be leading by example, so that this can be done outside. So how do we coordinate things, the inside and the outside? We have our own internal units and we have our external programming. How do we ensure that this is aligned? So when I came into office, I said I would like to have a special advisor that reports to me so as to take a holistic view. And this week, we'll be able to announce the new special advisor for gender, diversity, and inclusion. And you'll be able to hear that this same week. But having advisor is not just about that. We need to work on that. We've had quite a few changes within the bank in terms of the gender goals. We have made significant progress. And we do walk the talk. So we are doing what we are preaching. We are here with Anabel, with Irene, with Ana Maria. If you take a look at what is there, we are increasing gender representation. Of course, we need to work more on diversity. That is still a goal we need to pursue. We have ambitious goals, and we're going to get there because we are putting the spotlight on that. We need to have diverse people in the bank, and that matters. We are working on diversity, and this ties in with the question on Afro-descendants. Before leaving for this meeting, we had a leaders program including 20 Afro-descendant leaders at the bank. And this was very interesting because it's not just about the 20. We're talking about 20 leaders, and that was a true example for the bank. And that's something we can then also pass on to the outside world. And this means that gender and diversity are cross-cutting issues. So we talk, we explain, we have goals, but we have targets and ambitions that are cross-cutting. What does that mean? That all projects should also consider gender and diversity issues. And this is something we are working more and more on. I talked about a program that I'm told will be discussed today. It's a program in Brazil that also includes a component related to gender and diversity. And this is something you will have a chance to see what we're doing on the ground. I think that is important. So we are working inside the organization and also outwards with ambitious goals and specific programs. And one of those you will have a chance to hear about today. I think that would be my comment. Thank you, Mr. President. I think we still have room for 3 or 4 more questions. We had a gentleman over there, and sorry, you're in my blind spot. Thanks for the reminder. And we'll take a couple more questions over here. Please go ahead. We had someone waiting as well. If you keep it brief, we can take both. It's inclusive here, so let's take both of them. Hello, I'll try and keep it brief so that time is enough. Good morning, I'm Isabel from Colombia, from the Family Clearing Fund in Caldas, and I'm here with a colleague. My question is on productivity. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we are the ones who have the largest number of working hours, and still we are the least productive ones. How can the IDB support civil society organizations and private non-profits in order for us to learn how to implement productivity, automation processes, so that we can become more productive with a view to strengthening this and for us to truly grow as a region? Who should I contact? Who should I interact with? Who should I talk to? Because I have projects. Excellent, Isabel, thank you. Feliciano Racen, I represent the Dominican Evangelical Council, over 300 institutions, and congratulations to the IDB on including civil society. What I would like to know is what projects or plans the IDB has in terms of the gap resulting from the climate change issue in the world and its consequences for food security. We see regions that were highly productive and are no longer productive due to climate change. What can be done? Thank you for your question. Next one. I'm Ana Inoue from Brazil, from the Itaú Foundation. I would like to ask how the IDB is positioning itself in order to extend the scope of its focus on youth. Thank you. We take another question. Good morning, Julia Muñoz Alegre from the Economic and Social Development Council in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. My question is, what action, what measures is the IDB planning to undertake in this regard? And are you including civil society recommendations on transparency, democracy, and work to fight corruption? Thank you very much. One last question back there, please. Good morning. Ciria Les Mortificaciones. I come from Colombia, and I'm a member of an organization of farmers, growers, and my question is related to family-based and community farming. What sorts of actions will be undertaken, since this is one of the things that particularly matters nowadays, food production? And let me also say that I'm very pleased to hear that you are also thinking about women, about other social leaders. And on the ground, we want to be truly active actors, and we want to engage with the IDB. Thank you. Thank you. I will give the President an opportunity. We have quite a few more questions, but Mr. President, well, these are all very valuable questions. I would like to really delve into many of those. Well, of course, food security is a goal that I have been highlighting all along, and we are trying to see how we can improve things, not only for the countries individually, but for the region as a whole and for the world. I think it's an opportunity, since we can help deal with food insecurity in our communities, in our countries, but also I believe the region can leverage that in order to offer a solution from our region and for the benefit of the world. That creates work, creates jobs, and then comes that inflection point which attracts investments and positions our region in the world. So what the IDB wishes to do is to work on the ground while at the same time delivering global solutions. So you work locally for global solutions as well, which I think is particularly important. Now, how is the work done? There was reference to transparency, to fighting corruption. As I said, there will be a panel on transparency when we leave. But let me tell you a bit about my own interaction with governments. Often, we get criticism with regard to our procedures. They say that we are not agile, that things take a very long time, and there's other organizations that are supposed to be a lot quicker. I say hi and they give us the money. So that's one thing we get a lot. On the one hand, I think they may have a point. We need to be more agile. And I do see that there's a lot of red tape to be reduced and to be streamlined. But part of that has to do with the credibility and reputation of the IDB. There's the safeguards, the protection, so that when we engage in a project, we do so transparently, we do it the right way, there will be no risk of corruption or problems or issues relating to transparency. That's the way we work. We have independent ways to afford protection to all as part of our projects. So in a way, that is something that gives peace of mind to ourselves, but also to the projects, and therefore to the executing agencies and to the countries. So when I hear those remarks, of course, I do feel concerned and admit that we need to be more nimble inside the organization. But on the other hand, I say part of the process is precisely about what you're asking. Processes, transparency, the right way to do things, and that is, we have zero tolerance when it comes to deviations in that regard. So that's important.
Now, regarding young people, I think that working with young people is working in the best way possible with society. Let me give you an example because I don't have time to describe all of our projects, but let's talk about América en el Centro, America in the Center. I'll be brief. This is a project for Central America, and we have asked the countries to tell us that we want 3. My team knows that more than 3 is a problem. So we ask the countries, give us 3 priorities. Tell us what you want the IDB to do in Central America. As a group of countries, what do you want us to do? Climate change. Everybody says climate change. But one of the priorities is a social one. So it's not all of society, it is working with young people. How can we provide them with jobs? How can we give them the skills they need? How can we give them the primary education they need? How can we deliver health so that they can be healthy to work? And we're focusing on young people because a lot of the midterm changes we need involve generational change, and that is going to have an impact on poverty, but also on inequality. A lot of the inequality is not solved just with cash transfer programs. That too is important, but in the long term, the important thing is to provide everyone with an opportunity, and we have to begin with young people. That is key. Now, productivity. How are we doing on time? You can't go into many details. Well, I was going to call up Eric. Eric can come up just for a second because Eric was working in the research department, and there the focus was on productivity. So you have like 30 seconds, Eric. Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And that was a great question on productivity because you know, in Latin America and the Caribbean, productivity, the increase over 30 years has been 0. And if countries grow, because we invest more, they grow because we have better prepared workers and because we're doing things better. And the contribution of productivity across the region has been 0. But in the countries where per capita income has gone up, have higher productivity, and this is because they have invested in education and health and infrastructure. And allow me to provide you with a specific example having to do with financial inclusion. That too is an important ingredient. In Chile, we did an experiment where we hired actors to go apply for loans in the banking sector. And just imagine what we found. We found that there is discrimination against women in terms of access to credit. If you measure how much is not loaned, it was $12 billion, taking the same risk across the two genders. Because the characteristics were the same. The only thing is men look different from women. So socioeconomically, they were the same. So there is that difference. And we found it in Chile, but I'm sure the same applies to other countries. So thank you for that question. And we can discuss that bilaterally so that we can talk about the programs we have to support financial inclusion. I'm going to call on James. James is here, and I'll get him to answer the questions. Thank you, Eric. James is, well, I don't need to tell everyone who James is. But James is our CEO of IDB Invest, and IDB Invest is one of the arms of the IDB group. And the idea is to be transformational. He has worked a lot on transforming IDB Invest. So if you don't know James, here he is. Well, I'll begin. Here in the first row, you really can't see how full this room is. So I wanted to congratulate Anabel and everyone who worked on putting this opportunity together. It's truly impressive to begin our annual meeting in this way. So first of all, I wanted to respond to the question having to do with the cajas de compensación. Traditionally, multilaterals in the private sector work only with formal banks. Formal banks settle into the formal sector. And those of us who grew up working in Latin America, we knew that informality is huge. And there are other entities that provide knowledge and financing to vulnerable sectors of the population. And generally speaking, and a lot depends on the region. In the Caribbean, it is the building societies. In some parts of the region, it is a cooperative. In other parts, it may be NGOs. And basically, they all come under the heading of NGOs. And basically, and the president did touch on this, we are engaged in a transformation process. We're trying to transform the private sector so as to take on greater risk. And that is why we see cooperatives, we see the cajas de compensación and NGOs as a vehicle so as to allow us to reach vulnerable, unprotected populations that we could not serve through other financial mechanisms. And we're doing that working not only with money, but also with knowledge. A lot of what we're doing is to support the productivity of these organizations, to make them more productive, more sustainable over time. And part of that work has to do with technological advancements and greater productivity. So also I would like to touch upon the concept of food security. That was one of the questions, and it's one of our major points of business. We talk about from soil to plate. That is what we call it. So it's a whole food chain. And as we know, Latin America and the Caribbean are a breadbasket for the whole world, especially if you look at what is happening in Europe. And that is one of the major focuses of the work we're doing. Thank you. I think I'll call you James instead of James from now on, since we're here in the Spanish-speaking country.
Bueno, estamos listos
Para continuar,
Okay. We will continue to talk to civil society. So we're leaving, but you stay, please. Great. I wanted to thank the president of IDB and also the vice president for countries, Anabel González, for being here to talk to us today. And I thank all of you for your participation. So please turn your cell phones off And now we're going to be changing our approach. I'm going to call on you. Let's turn to an important area of Latin America and the Caribbean vis-a-vis the world. And I'm talking about our Amazon. What is the Amazon? It is biodiversity. It is forest and rivers. The video has subtitles, so I will not be interpreting.
Las ciudades, las periferias, su producción, trabajo y educación, el arte y la sabiduría del pasado y del futuro.
La deforestación en la Amazonía brasileña aumentó en 200%.
La Amazonía está llegando a un punto de inflexión ecológicamente irreversible. Amazonía Siempre es el programa paraguas y holístico que impulsa el desarrollo sostenible de la región amazónica. Trabajamos junto con comunidades locales e indígenas, gobiernos y empresas para mejorar la calidad de vida de todas las personas de la región. Trabajemos por el futuro de la Amazonía, de América Latina, del Caribe y del mundo.
Por favor.
Now I would ask for a round of applause to welcome Nadino Calapucha. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I would like to invite you to all stand. Let's extend our hands, close our eyes, and let's connect with what is called the Amazon. Let's think of birds, all sorts of animals, forests, plants, peoples that are struggling. Drinking guayosa, chicha, defending their lands, planting their crops. And let's ask them to send us energy to assure the success of this meeting. All while listening to this sound.
Por favor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and please be seated. So once again, good morning, everyone. My name is Nadino Calapucha, and I am a Quechua from the Amazon region. My community is called Siwa Kutra, and it's made up of 60 families. That is about 200 people, and it is in the center of Ecuador's Amazon in a province called Las Tasa. Many of you may have heard about the Amazon. Perhaps very few of you have been in the Amazon. And for some of you, it may seem to be something like a myth. But for me, and for more than 511 indigenous peoples, it is where we live. It is our home. According to the scientific panel on the Amazon, before colonization, there were about 10 million people living in the Amazon, and we live in 9 countries of Latin America, including French Guiana, that is not recognized as a country, but it is part of the biome. France should be an Amazon country, and actually it is. And we live in this biome, according to that scientific panel, we have been there for more than 12,000 years. But I was born there, so it's my home. I was born surrounded by trees, animals, close to a river called Carapuno. I grew up knowing how to row. I learned to swim when I was 10 years old. I would play with my cousins, and I grew up living with my grandparents. Now, every morning between 3 and 4 a.m., my grandfather would call me to the campsite, and he would interpret our dreams. And according to our dreams, he would interpret our future. And this while we drank wayusa, which is a traditional drink. It's actually a type of tea. It contains caffeine, it's a diuretic, and it also balances your senses. He would tell us stories, anecdotes, share legends, and also he taught us that we had to respect Mother Nature. I had a toucan, and I called my toucan Sikwanda. And it was a free-flying bird. When I would go to school, my toucan would go back to the jungle. And when I would come home, my toucan would come, and the whole idea was that she was coming back from the jungle to share her newly acquired knowledge with me. And my grandfather said that the toucan is a sacred bird because it flies high, it's hard to catch, and it knows about everything that's ever happened in the Amazon. It knows the true history. And my toucan one day left and never came back. And my grandfather said that perhaps she had a presentiment. She knew perhaps that soon she would have to leave behind that territory. And one morning when I came back from fishing with my 2 brothers, I could hear my parents talking to my grandparents. And they were saying that Nadino had to leave the community, that I had to go to the city. Now, back then, I really didn't know what they were talking about, but they said that at the age of 11, I had finished my primary school and it was time. But in our community, we did not have access to secondary education, and we had no access to higher learning, just like most of the indigenous peoples that live in the Amazon basin. And that means that I had to go to the city so that I could continue to study. My parents were in a position that they could assure that I got a good education. So one morning I saw my grandmother. She put in a basket, a changwa. She put in yuca, plantains, some of my favorite fruits. So she was preparing my baggage, my suitcase, because it was time. It was time for me to go to the city. I was very nervous. It was the first time that I was going to the city, and it was the first time that I was leaving my family, my parents, my grandparents, my cousins. It was the first time I was leaving my toucan behind, but also I was excited. I had dreams to take with me, and I carried that basket along with the blessing and the tears of my grandparents, I picked up the basket and I walked 5 hours through the jungle to reach the point of access. And from there, I had to take a bus and then travel 5 more hours to reach Bapuyo, which was the nearest city. Now, while I was on the bus, I was thinking about my home, my grandparents, and I was imagining what they were doing because that's where I had lived the whole time when I was growing up. I was well acquainted with their routines. But when I got to the city, there was a different reality. Lights never went off at night. There was a lot of noise, a lot of cars. And there I was in the city. And there was a requirement to be able to register for higher education, and that was you had to cut off your hair. I was forced to get a haircut. Now, when I left the jungle, I was determined to continue, and I had to deal with this challenge, but it really hurt. I felt that I was unprotected, that I was naked. I had lost my hair. I felt weak, and I was missing my grandparents much more. And often I wanted to sacrifice my dreams, turn around, and go home. And also for many children, for many young people, a lot of teenagers, the city is a true challenge. The language that I'm still learning to speak, I learned to speak Spanish when I reached the city. In other words, when I was 11 years old. I didn't know how to deal with technology. There were IT classes. And it's not that I didn't know because I didn't have the skill. It was because never had I had the opportunity to have a computer. I hadn't had the same opportunities that children or that adolescents have if they live in the city. So I had a double challenge. I had to learn as quickly as possible. But you have to struggle in the cities. You have to resist too, because there was a lot of discrimination. First of all, because I didn't speak Spanish well, and second, because since I was indigenous, I was discriminated against. Also, because I was an adolescent, and fourth, because I was considered to be poor. And every day, I had to stand up to those challenges. And discrimination still continues. If they see me with paint on my face, if I have long hair, they still discriminate against me. But now I'm strong. I know who I am in this world, so I'm not all that much affected. But I so much wanted to go home to my community, but as I learned a new language, I learned new words, new concepts. And while I was learning, I saw in the news that there were programs and there were policies that were going to destroy our territory. I immediately thought of my siblings, of the forest of my tucan, and my grandfather. And I knew that those policies, if we didn't do something, they were going to destroy our territory. So I decided I would stay, I would learn. And I became part of building the agenda for indigenous youth in Ecuador, and I became a spokesperson of this agenda in Ecuador. And during the years, I have learned that we had collective rights, that there were international treaties and agreements to defend indigenous peoples. And so I had to gain empowerment because of those rights. And as I learned, I also discovered a word: economy. All of you are experts in the economy, so I don't need to tell you what that word means. But as I was learning, I said we indigenous peoples have always been economists. We have always applied the principles of economy while we were living. while we were living, which is a collective effort to build a collective good. We would do the maki maniachi, which is a solidarity work. That means helping without expecting anything in exchange, or randi randi, which is reciprocity. Everything in a state of equilibrium and for the collective good. Also in balance with nature. There are many initiatives currently being implemented in the Amazon that are being developed by and guided by indigenous peoples. In Guanaco, some of the Quechua communities have organized and they're part of associations and they're producing guayus, which is the tea I told you about, and they are exporting to North America and to Europe. Also, in some communities of Peru's Amazon region, they are processing morete or kawate, which is a palm tree, and they are processing these fruits to make juice. So they are exporting, and this is based on traditional knowledge. And now, with the crisis that we are all experiencing, the climate crisis, we also face a political, economic, social crisis. And my grandfather always said that we are in crisis as a group in humanity. We are losing respect for each other. And that means that all of this gives rise to new concepts. The bioeconomy, that has already been explained. You all are acquainted with this. And basically, it's a definition that traditional knowledge, our forests, have to work hand in hand with modern knowledge, with technology, with science, contemporary knowledge, so as to find a response to the crisis. But the bioeconomy has to think of ways to protect the forest, because if deforestation is promoted, if human rights are violated, if Mother Nature is destroyed, the economy would not be in balance. It would not be a bioeconomy. It would continue to be an economy that exploits without looking at the rights of human beings and the rights of nature. Some studies in 2020 said that indigenous peoples, 82% of the best conserved biodiversity on the planet were in indigenous territories. But that defense has had a cost. It has cost many their lives. According to the largest indigenous organization on the planet, COICA, in 2011, they said that every 2 days, a indigenous defender was murdered in the Amazon basin. And it's not because they were indigenous. It was because they were defending their territory, their homeland. They were defending the important biome that science calls the biologic heart of the planet. And we indigenous peoples have defended those lands without expecting 1 cent back from humankind. But we're not here today to be seen as, oh, I feel so sorry for those indigenous peoples. We have to listen to them. Nice feathers, nice pictures. The time has come, and that is precisely why we're here. The time has come for us to not look at groups as either donors or beneficiaries, because we indigenous peoples cannot be entrepreneurs. Why can't we be? Why can't we build our own technology? Because we are defending it. Many communities are monitoring, defending their territories using drones with applications that have been built to defend our lands. And that is why I think that this is a key meeting. It's essential. We have the most important thing to assure climate stability, and that is our land, the knowledge, and also territorial governance structures. We are organized, there are structures, there are governments on our lands, and you have financing tools, technologies that we could work with. So we're not here to give speeches. We're not here as victims. We have come to share with you stories so that we can sit down as partners to talk to you. We are here to work with you in partnership, in Minga, as we call it, to work collectively, to take advantage of our ancestral knowledge, and also to work with all of the Western tools, to work with you.
So, in conclusion, I would like to leave with you a message from my grandfather. Mai tarijas, mai baoshas, kaba faitama, kambasa chama, kampa wasiman romonki. Wherever you go, wherever you may be, always go back to your territory, to your home, where your umbilical cord is buried. And I want to return. But I don't want to return empty-handed and with no news. My grandfather departed 4 years ago. And I want to come back to tell the spirits of my grandparents. I want to tell the toucan that will one day return. I want to tell my cousins, my aunts and uncles. We have so many indigenous peoples in the Amazon basin. I want to tell all of them that here in Punta Cana, in the Dominican Republic, a historic event has taken place. I want to tell them that indigenous peoples, governments, private banks, international organizations, NGOs, allies have reached a historic agreement that they have undertaken to work together for an economy that respects human rights and nature, and that they will build things together, and that there's hope to build a world that has the size of our dreams. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Nadino.
Thank you very much, Nadino. Calapucha, certainly an inspiring story. We can hear that through the applause. Certainly impressive to have heard your story, and we are making history in Punta Cana through this meeting today. Once again, a big hand for Nadino Calapucha. And from Amazonia, we now move on to another very important point in a region which has to do with groups in vulnerable situations and informal employment. I would like to welcome Mauricio Pintado with a big round of applause from us all. Welcome, Mauricio. Good morning to all of you, and I'm Mauricio. I was born in Uruguay in an urban area, and my family and friends had close links to the countryside, to the rural environment. I always loved agricultural production ever since I was a child. As I used to travel around the rural areas with my parents as a child, really started falling in love with the countryside and agricultural and rural production. When I was 15, I went to an agricultural school in the interior of Uruguay. I graduated at university, worked for over 10 years in agricultural dairy companies, and I was a rural employee in those days. And around those days, I also learned that not just did I love the countryside, but also human resources and labor. So I became an entrepreneur. I founded a human resources scouting company, and I selected all sorts of workers for different businesses, including farm workers, tractor drivers, you name it. But in 2015, things changed. The price of grains and milk came tumbling down. Now, the crisis was of such a magnitude that my business almost disappeared. I had to sell my car to pay for dismissed employees and other debts that were piling up. So I was left with nothing. But businesses then started to have different needs. Businesses that used to have permanently employed staff started to go for temporary hires. And that was something that I couldn't offer at the time. My services were slow and costly. So we decided to look into the problem and see how big it was. And over 60% of the companies were unable to hire the workers they needed. But what struck me most was that many people, though available and knowledgeable, didn't link up to these job offerings. So we decided to create a platform to link companies needing seasonal and temporary workers to people who were skilled, who knew how to do the jobs, and who were willing to do them. So this was a platform that would prioritize the quality of people as workers, leaving aside the bias, and we'll see why I talk about bias. I remember when we started to get to know these workers, I encountered a very different reality. We had to invest a lot of time and creativity to ensure that these people could actually register on a platform. But we finally succeeded, and today there are over 80,000. And these people, unlike the workers I had previously known from rural areas, live in urban areas, the periphery of cities, and every day they commute from the city to the countryside to work on pruning, on harvesting, on all sorts of agricultural tasks. They are people with very low income. They come from very humble surroundings. They live in irregular settlements with no sanitation, in flood-prone areas very often. The fact is that these people include 10% LGBT and former prison inmates. While still fresh into this, I found that many people left their formal jobs for informal ones, where they got paid less, but they were paid within the day, which I found remarkable. So we started doing some research and ran a survey, and we asked people what they would do with the money if they could collect that on the same day. And the answers I found surprising, because 70% of the people answered they would buy food. 15% of them would use the money to pay off debt. And the rest would use the money to pay rent or essential services. And some responses were about buying clothes or buying a new cell phone or traveling. but those answers didn't even account to 1%. So these people were really living from hand to mouth. So then I wondered if someone who earns $15 or $20 a day, and I'm speaking for Uruguay because in the region the average value is a lot lower, how do those people manage to ensure that their families get enough food, and how can they support their families when opportunities seem to be so elusive? And, we had the grape picking season, and of course, if you do this manually, the wines are much higher quality than if you do this through automated means. And one vineyard in the south of Canelones in Uruguay requested 40 workers for the grape picking, which was quite a milestone for us. And on the first day this took place, we went along with Rodrigo, the co-founder, and my partner at the time, to see how this happened. But things took a different turn. The vineyard wasn't prepared for the grape picking, which made it very hard to do the job. At noon, the temperature was over 40 degrees Celsius. There was no shade, no breeze, and the drinking water was dark, hot. Many workers started getting annoyed and wanted to leave, and rightly so. So, faced with that situation, we said, no, we need to make this succeed. We need to help the people, motivate them. So we started to pick grapes ourselves, to load the boxes. We started helping people in whatever way we could. And at one point, I was literally roasting in the heat. I was all red, full of dirt, stained with grape juice all over, blisters on my hands after carrying boxes and dying of thirst. The work these people do is truly tough. It's not the sort of work for anyone. Sometimes you think about the grape picking as something colorful, but it's very tough work, and often with very hostile weather situations or conditions. And I got to meet Adrian, a man just like me. He's a family father. The difference is that he has a very severe disability and he uses crutches to walk. But on that day, I met him during the grape picking grapes, filling boxes, and taking the boxes to the other end of the row for the tractor to carry that away. All of that to support his family for this very low wage we were talking about. And I also met a lot of other people. I met a young man who was 26. He was in prison and he had 2 days a week on which he was allowed to work. On one of those days, he went to the grape picking and I talked to him. The problem this young man had was that he was addicted to drugs, just like his father and 4 of his 6 siblings. The truth is, in that group, there was a high level of diversity. Very young mothers, grandmothers, young guys who were doing their first work experience. Many men who were over 30, lots of stories of hard work and sacrifice to get by. And you know what? In Latin America, there are 35 million people like them. And this is a figure that has continued to rise in the past decade. And we were really pleased to be an inclusive platform that offered opportunities. But the fact is, we realized that we had to go the extra mile. We had to do a little more, because with just a little more, we could be changing these people's lives. So through a number of studies, we found that there were 4 areas in which these people had serious difficulties. The first one being nutrition, getting food. So they really have to go out of the way to take food back home. And they eat the fruit they pick to have the belly full. And then, of course, there's mouth health. And this is not just about beauty. You know, you think about a beautiful smile when you go to the dentist, but these people have mouth health issues that, if not treated in time, lead to other chronic diseases elsewhere or in the bodies. And the other point was about recreation. These families really have no leisure activities for their context or circumstances. And we had a lot of failed initiatives precisely because we failed to take this into account. And the opportunities were not taken advantage of. So it's about the health and welfare of people. And last but not least, financing. I don't know if this is... These people need money to go to work, to pay the fare, $50 to get to work. And that's what the finance boils down to, that single dollar. If that person doesn't have that dollar, they lose their job. We have also signed agreements with the Ministry of Social Development in Uruguay, and 10% of the work quota goes into people who have difficulty joining the job market, former prison inmates, among others. And every single day we get to see very tough stories. We have some audio issues. We are helping these people every day. The interpretation will momentarily stop until the audio goes back to normal.
Una persona de estas, con ese dólar para poder ir a trabajar, le estamos cambiando la vida.
So, by ensuring that those people have that dollar they need, we are truly changing their lives. And I would like to invite us to join our experiences, to work together. So we want to achieve positive, sustainable impact for the benefit of these people.
Muchísimas gracias, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. This puts the issue into a different perspective that we often overlook. Please remember to keep your cell phones silenced, and we also invite you to interact with us on social media and help us stay focused. And thank you for being active using our hashtag IDBOfficial. That's for our social media. You have always been closely following our work with you, and we want to keep that direct interaction. And we are putting also everything on our social media. Now I would like to ask a central question. What will be the link between transparency and inclusion in development? And for this, I would like to invite our moderator and panelists who are ready to share with us the next topic. So a big round of applause for them.
Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is truly an honor to be with all of you and with this truly exceptional panel. Just let me say that Maya Seeger is on this panel for the IDB working group, although she belongs to Sustentarse. This is a group of civil society members who actually look at the IDB's work. And our panel today is on the link between transparency and access to information and development. This is a truly important topic, and it reflects the very heart of good governance, whether you are actually government or a multilateral bank like the IDB. But transparency is not just a governance issue, but rather a critical input for development effectiveness. So it's about making a positive, true, measurable difference for people, their families, communities, and for climate and nature. So our panelists today will share with us evidence as well as their experiences of how transparency and information can help deliver on our aspirations in terms of development and climate, and what kind of data and information truly matters, in what stage of the process, and for whom. So having said that, I will start with our colleague Paul James from a non-profit, a charity in the UK, which is called Publish What You Fund.
You share examples of how more transparency can lead to greater effectiveness?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, Amanda. At Publish What You Fund, we are an advocacy organization which promotes transparency both from aid agencies and multilateral development banks and DFIs. So, of course, we can point to examples of this relationship between transparency and development effectiveness. But first, if you will allow me, I think I'd like to just reframe the question slightly. When we talk about the access to information, we recognize that as a human right. Obviously, in Latin America, it's enshrined in many national laws, in regional agreements such as Escazú. And therefore, our view is it's actually very hard to have any development effectiveness if you don't have transparency as one of the building blocks. So in many ways, I think we see transparency as very much a kind of necessary but not sufficient aspect of achieving development effectiveness. Onto the kind of more tangible links then between the two. One thing that Publish What You Fund have worked on over the last decade is supporting the development and quality of the IATI data standard. So we run 2 programs at the moment, which are indexes measuring transparency, and each incentivize publication of aid data and development finance data to this data standard. I think over recent years, what we have witnessed is the global data set that this standard produces has improved both in quality and scale to the point where civil society and other stakeholders, including institutions themselves, but also shareholders, are able to use this data to effectively hold these institutions to account, to govern these institutions, and for the institutions to manage themselves more efficiently. If I have time, I'll dive into a couple of very
Can you give a couple of examples? And also tell people, what does IATI stand for? IATI.
Of course. So IATI is the International Aid Transparency Initiative. So it was set up really to standardize the way that aid data is disclosed. So the IATI standard guides this, and then institutions such as IDB and IDB Invest publish data to this standard. Just in terms of examples from civil society, there was a recent CNN story about aid from the global north flowing to Ghana, and it was in support of, or it was flowing to organizations who were supporting a anti-LGBTQI law which was to be passed. Obviously, this makes the aid sound perhaps not particularly development effective, but I think in that kind of broader conception of how civil society feeds into the development effectiveness of these programs, it really allowed these journalists to identify the parties who were kind of promoting these regressive views, and the data set was really fundamental to this work.
Yeah. There's so many ways to use the IATI data, so I do suggest maybe we can post a link afterwards. Let's go now to Maya. Desde la perspectiva del bid.
From the perspective of the IDB working group, how can multilateral banks such as the IDB enhance transparency, and why is it important to think about transparency in tandem with access to information, participation, and stakeholder engagement and accountability? Thank you very much. First, greetings to all of you on behalf of the IDB Working Group, which is a working group of civil society organizations, both international, regional, and national in scope. We currently have here with us representatives from a whole lot of countries. There's over 30 organizations. Hi there. I've been entrusted with the responsibility of speaking on behalf of the group. Thank you for the trust in me, and I would like to explain some of what we do. We are an independent organization. We don't receive funds from the IDB, and our role, as the president said, is to inform and discipline, as he said, and often our role is not truly comprehended by all stakeholders. Sometimes it is up to us to say what things are not working properly. So I would first like to provide that context so that you understand what we're about. We believe that transparency is crucial. As a human right, Paul mentioned this, and it is a key right as it enables access to other rights, such as the right to participation, to consultation, and to accountability. So unless we are able to get the required information duly on time, and if that information is not truly usable and expressed in culturally appropriate ways and language, as civil society, our right to exercise the other rights is curtailed. And especially in the context of our work, which focuses on human rights and on good social and environmental governance, there's the important right of communities to have a say in decisions that affect them in their own territories, typically projects that may carry impact and risk, but also when it comes to policy making, because they often lead to certain projects or change the scope and framework of intervention. So our working group has been collaborating critically with the bank, providing perspectives and feedback from the point of view of communities and civil society in terms of policy changes and safeguards for the bank. Also, with a focus on projects that we have found could prove risky or have adverse impact for different sets of stakeholders, especially marginalized groups. So, Amanda, in responding to the question, that is basically the reason for the importance of transparency and access to information for this large segment of the population that might be affected by the bank's decisions. Yes, information here is key. And we will now talk to Roberto Saba. Not only is he a professor of constitutional law and human rights, but also he's a member of some independent committees providing advice as part of our information process. From your point of view, why is this important, and how does the demand for greater transparency originate, and what stakeholders are involved? How can we actually market our access to information for the benefit of people? Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. In addition to being a professor and being on the external access to information panels of the IDB, I have been a human rights activist and have worked on access to information, so I have a historical perspective on the importance of the right to information and transparency for over 20 years already. And these social demands and these civil society demands are very recent. 30 years is quite novel. And this started due to environmental problems, corruption issues in the region, and they have pressurized governments, especially at the beginning, into having access to information mechanisms as part of a policy on transparency that is critical for development. With no access to information, there can be no transparency. If there's no transparency, there can be corruption. If there's corruption, there's no development. So as the first stage of social demands for access to information, we have looked at governments and demanded that they regulate access to information through laws on information access in the countries in a region. This is pretty novel. Some countries, like Argentina, until 2017, had no access to information law.
So that demand on governments has also created greater mindfulness about the need for transparency. And all of this has spread. Right now, there are demands for transparency on the part of the private sector. For example, also international financial institutions are being pressured. And all of these entities are thinking of and designing different ways to respond to those requirements. Governments have access to information laws in place, and the private sector and international financial institutions also have reacted and implemented transparency policies. So basically, that is where things stand. Thank you. And how do you think, or what would be some good examples of what you were saying about laws or the private sector? Well, here there's something that's very important, and it's been said. It was said by the president and then later also, but access to information is a tool to assure respect for rights. It's a way to hold governments and other institutions responsible. It is an instrument for participation. Here it was said that the bank requires greater participation, greater engagement, because without access to information, we cannot control the way in which governments and the private sector interact in the marketplace. So we need to have information that is related to that so that the market and private activities will operate properly. Unfortunately, we have seen some cases in the region where there has been corruption, and that has touched upon the state and the private sector, or sometimes also this has led to a greater call, a stronger call for transparency and access. Now I call on Andrea Repetto, who is director of the IDB's Independent Consultation and Investigation Mechanism, ICIM. So please tell us a bit about the MISI mechanism, how it assures compliance with the bank's operational policies, and for you, exactly what is the role for transparency in promoting development? Thank you, Amanda, and good morning. It is a pleasure to be here with you today and to see such a full room. It's important to be having this conversation about the role of transparency and inclusion in development. So let me refer to MISI. Development is hard to achieve. The region has many current and future needs to address. And for the IDB group to be able to play that role and to help the countries of the region achieve development and accomplish its mission of improving lives, the bank holds itself to a high standard so as to do this in a way that's sustainable. In this very complex effort, not everything will always turn out well. So it's important for the IDB group, as part of this effort for transparency, honesty, be able to find a way to address and handle situations that did not turn out as foreseen, working with the public, the private sector, and also with civil society organizations. So in order to be able to respond to those scenarios where there may have been negative environmental or social impacts, the way that the IDB group responds is very important. And one way, one type of response is by making available to citizens an independent accountability mechanism, and that is MISI, the ICIM, so as to be able to heed those voices and thus help communities, the public and private sector, NGOs, the IDB group, to find solutions, to find a response to the problem situations that have arisen, so as to be able to hold the bank to these high standards. So now, for those not acquainted with MISI, MISI is the Independent Consultation Investigation Mechanism, and it spans the whole IDB group. ICIM is an accountability office, and we look at transparency as well as environmental and social complaints, looking at any social impact of a project financed by the IDB, and that could be in either the public or the private sector. ICIM was born at an annual meeting like this one, and that was in 2010 in Cancun, Mexico. The governors decided that the 9th capital increase of the IDB would depend upon the creation of our office, and the office was created to make certain that the IDB projects would be sustainable. And that means that they truly do contribute to the development in the region. And if there are communities that feel that they have been affected by a project, it could be a road, an airport, a power line, for example, there would be a way to channel concerns or complaints. And the ICIM is an independent group. We report directly to the Board of Executive Directors of the IDB, and their member countries are represented. That independence is very important for our office because it allows us to work impartially, objectively with all of the parties involved. Thank you very much for that description of the ICIM, and I will come back to you so that we can talk about what we are learning about. Now, let me go back to Paul.
What would you be analyzing about the IDB or IDB Invest? And I know that you have really specialized in looking at development finance institutions like IDB Invest. Please.
Thank you. So one of the projects we undertake, we call the DFI Transparency Index. So it measures the transparency of 30 public sector and private sector MDB and bilateral DFI portfolios across the globe. IDB and IDB Invest are both featured in it. So within our non-sovereign or private sector, IDB Invest actually rank as the 5th most transparent of the institutions, scoring approximately 42 out of 100. So they're not positioned so badly, but there is clearly work to do.
You could do better.
You could do better. IDB on the sovereign side currently ranks 3rd out of the institutions that we measure. I think something that is hopefully particularly relevant to this audience and ties into some of the comments around MISI is, in the case of IDB, they're one of the few institutions who have a policy that actually directs that the client or the borrower must inform project-affected communities about the presence of the independent accountability mechanism. This is something we look for in policy and we reward through the index. What is missing, though, with respect to IDP, and we think this is particularly important, is to go a step beyond having that policy and providing some form of assurance that the policy is actually followed. We typically don't see this, so we look for evidence that IDB have actually ensured that whoever has borrowed capital, whoever is implementing a project, has actually done the policy required outreach to project-affected communities. We look at a lot of stakeholder engagement plans, a lot of pre-project impact appraisals, and while we find this on occasion, it's something which is lacking. So this is something which we would really like to see be developed further and to really kind of drive that assurance of community disclosure, not just with MISI, also across the actual project disclosure, environmental and social disclosure, but it applies also to the MISI. I think in terms of our product and how it can be used, it is essentially a comparative analysis. Across the product, we compare over 100 different types of data that are disclosed across these institutions. So I'd really encourage people to kind of look at the results and kind of identify best practice, hold the institutions to account of this best practice, and also, I guess, kind of celebrate where that best practice is at times.
Yeah, okay, great. So we'll look forward to your reporting on this in the future, and of course, some of the organizations here today may also be interested in doing more. Let's go back to you, Maya. ¿Dónde ves que están los desafíos?
Where do you think the challenges and opportunities lie with a view to the future? Well, first of all, I would like to stress that the IDB has access to information policies, and also we have an environmental and social action framework, and that framework is well developed. However, we have to assure continuity and implementation in terms of the capabilities in-house of the IDB, but also looking at implementation on the part of our clients. In this case, it could be governments. It could also be the private sector. In the case of IDB Invest, they work with corporations, and there a lot of the information provided to us by the corporation is shared, it's sent forward. So the company always says that things are perfect, and that often may not be the case. Often there is information that is not posted. For example, in Argentina, there was a project called Lithium Salt of Life, and there is a study that was not shared with the communities. Also, sometimes there are problems with access to information if the information is requested, or that access is not provided in a timely fashion. Now, operationally, often we do have problems. So I think that here we have room for improvement. Also, we feel that in the access to information policy that is currently being developed, and right now it's out for consultation, we think that alignment with the agreement is important. The agreement that in Latin America is the guideline for access to information, and it's mentioned only as a footnote without giving it the importance it deserves. We have 24 signatory countries in the region. Also, we think that in terms of transparency, it would be a lot, or we should have greater involvement of civil society at the level of decision-making. The president this morning was talking about looking for solutions at the regional level. Now, we don't know who makes those decisions, who sets priorities, who is involved. And it would be important for civil society to be able to also take part in what is called upstreaming. In other words, making these major strategic decisions on regional policy. Now, I could go on and on addressing some practical concerns. Those are things that we're looking at because we have done a lot of technical work. But basically what I am doing is pointing to some of our findings. There are opportunities that we see with high expectations following the announcement made by the president this morning, where he talked about a framework for our engagement with civil society. So this is a good time to strengthen our ties and to get feedback from those of us who are on the ground. And we're the ones that feel the sometimes undesired impact of decisions made without involvement of people that are actually affected by those decisions. So I also want to thank the IDB Working Group and all members. Thank you very much for commenting on the institutional strategy, for example, also for access to information policy. All of this is tremendously helpful, and I think that that is a major takeaway from the morning session. Now, going to back to what was said about the private sector. Could you extend the same demand for transparency? Could you apply that to the private sector? And again, could you give us some examples? What have you seen in the public and private sectors? Well, I would begin with the second part of your question. When we got started with these transparency practices, the access to information, etc., with governments, we have seen things happening in the private sector. In recent years, we have seen a lot of activities that used to be handled by the state are now in the hands of the private sector. That could be public utilities or defense, say law enforcement, jails. So the question is, well, what we used to think was in the hands of government is now being dealt with by the private sector. And so, for example, we see entities providing public services. Also, we see management of private sources. Sometimes in some countries, that is seen as something that enjoys an exception. So databases are often in private hands, and people want to know what those databases say about them. Also, another thing, as Maya was saying, the international financial institutions, IFIs, like the IDB, also have had to respond to a call for greater transparency, and they have responded with access to information policies. That's relatively new, and those policies mean that information can be requested from the IDB, from the IDB Invest, and in case that request is denied, there is an appeal mechanism in place. And then ultimately there is an external panel that would deal with that request. And we decide based on those cases where access to information has been denied. So all of this, here the important thing is just what we see with the access to information policies or laws. They are a point of departure so as to begin to deal with that call for information. So there are different instruments to access the information. But civil society, there are a lot of people here that work with civil society, and they need to be able to use these tools so that they can implement the policy. Policies never implement themselves. That's true. They have to be used to see what works and what doesn't. So thank you very much for the services that you are providing to all of us by serving on this external panel. Now, Andrea, looking to the future, what are the future challenges for MISI, for the bank policies? What are the main considerations regarding access to information and transparency in the future? Well, thank you, Amanda. First of all, before talking about challenges, I would like to pick up on what Maya was saying about implementation. In other words, having high standards. Often that is not enough. Implementation often faces major challenges. But the truth is, it's essential to be able to hear from the communities so that they can receive information about the projects. And that information has to be clear, timely, and there has to be transparency. And if there is an impact, the mechanisms have to be in place. They have to have the information. So this is precisely inclusion and accountability. So if there is no transparency, if there's no inclusion, if there's no accountability, it is truly hard for there to be development. And now I would like to talk about the challenges. They are related. In the MISI, we have many global challenges that also affect the region. But in the MISI, I would say that access is one of the main issues. That's something that Roberto said. If these tools are there, people need to know they exist, that they're available, and that they can be used. And that is important. People, communities need to know that these mechanisms do exist so that they can use them. And they can, when things do not work well, what they can do, what we can do to make certain that policies will be complied with if they haven't been in the past. Another important thing regarding access is how can we be efficient in our responses? How can we truly work with different groups, different players, so that they can work, or we can work jointly with them to find a solution to the complaint they bring. Also, how can the IDB group, working with the public and private sectors, how can we begin to understand the importance of these mechanisms? The environmental, the social problems addressed by organizations like MISI, or if things don't work out as foreseen, when there's an undesired impact, how can we work with the mediation agencies or groups to find an answer? That is very important. Then we have more global challenges, but this ties in with opportunities too. I think the new institutional strategy of the IDB group will be an opportunity because it clearly lays out what we're doing in sustainability, transparency, inclusion, accountability, and these are essential elements for development. From my perspective, I think that in order to be truly transparent, we have to be able to monitor our projects, for example, in the Amazon. All of this is key for the region, but definitely the importance of this side-by-side work where everyone in the IDB group, where civil society, where the public and private sectors are all working together. All of that is going to be very important. MISI is right at the heart of all of these safeguards, all of these mechanisms to ensure that projects will unfold properly. And we are seeing how effective you are in practice. So I think that this brings us to the end of the time allotted for this discussion. I don't know if any panelist has a final comment. Yes, please go ahead. Yes, I wanted to share with you some information from a study done by one of our members. It's the Accountability Council. Between 2010 and 2023, they analyzed more than 230 complaints submitted to MISI. And they were able to find that 31% of those complaints originated because of a lack of transparency, a lack of participation. So by improving those two aspects, we could also avoid a lot of conflicts. Right, that goes right to the heart of the matter. So, message received. I wanted to thank all of our panelists for their participation, for their insights, and we are very excited with our ability to work together. So I'm going to call on Flavia Milano, who is our lead specialist. I would ask Flavia to come back on stage. Thank you for that applause. This has been a very exciting morning. We have a full room here today. And thank you, Amanda, for giving me this opportunity. And also, I thank the panelists because they're the true experts in transparency. When we talk about abstract issues, and with transparency, accountability, those are abstract concepts, but how do we apply them? First of all, we heard from Nadino from the Amazon. We heard about informal labor opportunities. And something that we see in IDB and IDB Invest is that with the tools that we have, we really cannot be effective in including stakeholders. This morning, the president said it several times. It was emphasized also by the vice president. We need to have the three players in development together: governments, private sector, public sector. The three have an important role to play to assure the development of Latin America and the Caribbean. So, and what I was saying, where we realized that we really didn't have the tools that we needed, we decided to go to the region. And we asked hundreds of CSOs. We met with all of the UN agencies you can think of. We met with other multilaterals. And we always ask the same question: what happens if we do work together well? If something worked out well, what happened? If something didn't work out well, what happened? And what we found is that you as CSOs, as foundations, as think tanks, as chambers, you're always finding that 5 things happen. Out of the 5, 3 are certain. And what we found was information. You just talked about information, transparency, access to information, but it's not only access to information. This is a two-way street because there's the information I gather and the information I provide. And when I say gather, we have this new dimension of civil society. That is citizens. These are people that have joined together and they are influencing reality. And that changes things. Over the last 5 years, the whole concept of civil society has changed. We have information, we have dialogue like we have here today. It's what we are promoting, and the president said this. This is a historic moment. It is a moment of change. We want to do things better. So these dialogues, these meetings, and we're going to the countries with this too. We have also met with indigenous communities for public consultation. Some of you have participated in public consultations. Others may have heard mention of that type of consultation, but we have worked hard to try to constantly improve. And then there are 2 levels that we saw, things that sometimes happen, sometimes don't, but hopefully they will. One thing is collaborating, working together. When we talk about ancestral knowledge, that may appear on the ground, but NGOs, CSOs can say, let's do this in a better way. Sit down, hear how we would like to do it. So we want to work with you to strengthen you as part of institutional capacity. And the last thing that we saw is partnerships. Nadino talked about this. So we, as partners, often leverage resources on the ground. Now, I have had the future of meeting with hundreds of you, and today we're meeting as a family. But in meeting you, we have seen that we can leverage resources working with local corporations or companies, or others say, let's apply this public policy. So it's an invitation to think differently. That is what the president was saying this morning, where we are taking action to implement what he called for. And we see that often there can be shortcomings. And they say to me, Flavia, how can there be failings? Because all of us here are over the age of 12, and we've all experienced failure, and that makes us stronger. It gives us experience, and institutions are no exception. They go through the same cycle. So today we showed you a failure that I would like to share with you. It's a case that we compiled to present it today.
En una operación de infraestructura de transporte en el norte de Itaupei.
This is an infrastructure operation. There, they mapped the populations in the zone with the idea of connecting them to markets inland, as well as also reaching educational centers and sports facilities. The project was months behind. The project leader decided to reach the region with the work already done, respecting the operational policies of the institution that call for information on the projects, that led to posting objectives and expected results on a web page. The socioeconomic feasibility studies showed that the initiative was well structured, and also they had attracted interest from international capital markets that were anxious to invest in this area that was rich in natural resources. So the idea was to attract new investment to the communities. The project team leader talked to local persons, and since the mapping had been done, and not all of the direct beneficiaries of the project were informed of the project, that created distrust in terms of the true intentions of the project, especially because of some activities in part of the country. And so activities were carried out to attract information directly, but the people living in the area said that they had not been consulted and that this could have an impact on their future. So what did we see here? We saw people that were doing their work well, very committed, saying we're going to do this consultation, this dialogue, but we're behind schedule. This is a super project. People are not going to be against it. So let's move ahead. This is a case that we have summarized here. One thing here is that this is a factor that we often overlooked, and it is something that people say, and it is perception is reality. I wish that I would have come up with that, but it's something that people often say. What people perceive is their reality. And here, where they tried to correct what they didn't do early on, but not intentionally, they were trying to do things better, more quickly. And so what people were perceiving was, we want a school. And we were saying, okay, we're going to provide them with another type of activity. And the people in the community were saying, no, that's not what we want. And so that holds us back in terms of our projects. So there's another case. And here the bank has shown you this case. You can see it on the bank's web page. Otherwise, you can stop me in the halls and ask me. But we also have success stories. So if there are no questions, if there are no comments, and here, first of all, I want to thank the panelists for being with us today, and I will stop here. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a los.
Thank you very much to all panelists for their certainly enlightening contributions, and thank you for following up on what we're discussing here. We are nearing the end of this session, so we will now move on to a discussion regarding innovation. Innovation has many faces, so I would like to invite our panelists to join us on the stage. So a big round of applause for them.
Vamos a tener una pausa.
We'll just take a 5-minute break, so please stay in the room. Feel free to share your photos using our official hashtag, BidReunión Anual.
Date la vuelta, vamos a darle.
Bueno, bienvenidos a esta sesión.
Welcome to this session. Actually, to this segment, to conclude this morning's program. And it did start so nicely with our inaugural. And I think that was very much shaped by questions from the audience, such as Leonardo's, regarding what else we were doing concretely to leverage innovation technology and help close the diversity and not just gender gaps, but also those involving people with disabilities, Afro-descendants, and LGBTQ. So we have the perfect person here with us, who we shall now introduce to dive deeply into that with truly an amazing wealth of experience. And Tainara is going to share with us information on the program in Brazil. And I think this is something that can be replicated, and it applies to everyone. I would like to give you a little bit more context beforehand, as the focus of our work, as previewed by our president, Ilan Goldfajn, this morning. The focus is increasingly on effectiveness and impact, and on closing the most profound gaps in our region, one of them being the inequality gap, not just as regards all of the groups we mentioned, but as we all know, on the way out of the pandemic, of course, the blow was harder for our groups and for youth in general, not just women. We have 30 million young people in our region who have no opportunities for work, who are not studying either. And with such innovative solutions as the ones Tainara will talk about, dealing with programs to build the skills of the future through new platforms and new methods for education and employability, we can't continue to have so many millions of young people not working or studying. So we are here to close that gap. Of course, the training requires a whole process to drive the most innovative companies in the region. And there's the role of venture capital and startups and organizations across the region. For this, venture capital still has plenty of room for growth. It peaked at $5 billion in investments in the region a few years ago, and then it went down, and it has to continue to increase, not just to pick up where it left off, but it needs to increase to levels close to similar levels to those in other emerging regions. That's the sort of work we look forward to with programs such as Reprograma, and I would specifically like to focus on some of the impact we're already getting to see. When we marry these things, venture capital with a focus on highly innovative businesses, which also deliberately take action to have greater participation by groups that have traditionally been underrepresented. As for women, there are statistics, and we know that just a 10% increase in the hiring of women as partners of a venture capital fund could increase 1.5% the return of those funds. Women invest founders actually generate twice the amount of their male counterparts, and Afro-descendants also ended up with a 30% increase relative to others and going to the stock exchange. So this is also an economic engine. It's not just about equality per se. And we know this is not solved only through investment and financing. For those of you here in the entrepreneurial and venture capital community, it is important to note that we're here to talk and create opportunities for investment. And we have invested in a whole lot of investment funds in venture capital and in over 800 high growth businesses in the region. And also, to close this gap, we have engaged in a program on diversity in venture capital so as to provide support with a first set of 5 funds as part of a program to ensure that there are more partners in terms of management and the businesses themselves, also working on programs to hire digital talent. And we will delve deeper into that. So, that said, in terms of the challenges and opportunities and the tools we have as IDB Group, and of course, with all the others, some of which are represented here. Tainara, one first question, starting, of course, by asking you to briefly tell the participants what Reprograma is about. After that, could you tell us what sorts of actions we may undertake, considering that according to the Global Gender Gap Report of the World Economic Fund for 2023, at the current pace of progress, it'll take us 131 years to achieve full equality. So you and I, at that pace, will probably and obviously not be around to see that. How can we work together to see that equality in our own lives? And tell us, please, about Reprograma and the focus. It's sad, yeah, 131 years, and we won't be around. But we are starting to work in order to ensure that at least the gaps will not be that huge. And our initiative teaches coding to women in Brazil and also raises awareness among young girls and women for them to pursue careers and training in technology. And as to what we can do before the 131 years, when we think about the future of society in general, we are looking at a society that will be fully turning to technology as a focus. And so we need to think about where we stand today so that the young girls and women get there with opportunities, and with opportunities in that future we envisage. So what we can also do now is work on that, because that is the job market of the world. Many positions will be related to technology, and we need for women to get there being already prepared to hold those kinds of positions. Very good. Tell us a bit more. With us here is the CIO of the IDB Group, and we've had experiences involving other programs before Reprograma, programs that were focusing on the gender gap and also on the digital skills of women. As said this morning, we want to walk the talk, and thanks to the human resources and technology groups of the IDB, we have also had women from those programs actually being involved in the workforce of the IDB, and they have helped us achieve a digital transformation. So, under Reprograma, what are the skills you see emerging in the people who go through that, and why do you think it is all important to have an early entry. Today, one major topic is artificial intelligence, and there are other topics. More and more people are getting into data issues. Cybersecurity is very powerful. We also have a whole lot of other organizations that may take this view, seeking to connect the market to what we are doing today. Also connecting to organizations that help us move forward, such as the IDB, where there has been a digital transformation. The IDB being the organization that is sort of investing in order to be able to keep up with the skills. And when you talk about starting increasingly early, what does that mean in terms of the sorts of alliances or partnerships you need in order to pave the way, including work with universities so that they may also help you stay updated while at the same time going along the whole path from childhood to higher education? Can you tell us more about that journey and what are the priorities as regards to skills and how do you stay updated? It should be noted that after many tests and trials, Reprograma has realized that it's not just about focusing on the education of women, but it's about helping them get into the job market. Because if you have a woman with a nice piece of paper, a diploma, and they don't get a job, then the mission is not accomplished. And we then need to see how the woman or the women in general will be staying on in those positions. Because when you look at the listings, you will see that there is a high degree of diversity groups, women and other minority groups that are left aside. How do we change the mindset in order for the market to really take these groups on board and for them to be able to pursue careers in these areas? So we teach skills, but it's also about ensuring that they're employed and that they can hold down those jobs. And if we look back, there's also a need for, because there's been a whole life of suggesting that women are not cut out for technology-related careers. And we also need to prepare the market and connect to the ecosystem. What are we doing with organizations and companies? We need to look at the market and see what they need in terms of skills. So we are talking as well to companies that support us with our projects. So there has to be ongoing communication among all of the actors involved in this process, so that we, either at Reprograma or other organizations, in particular in this field, we want to make sure that we train people who can join the market, but we also need to achieve the ultimate objective, which is to bridge the gender gap and make sure that these people can fill the positions. Right. And by way of reference, what we're getting to see is that the gap is being closed as regards training and access for women and other diversity groups to these future skills, not just about coding anymore, but also in terms of skills that can be used in real life. Of course, AI is everywhere. And of course, there's blockchain and so many other developments that require sophistication in programs. So that is being dealt with. But Tainara, when it comes to employability, there's still a bit of a shortcoming, right? Non-STEM jobs have only 43% of women in the region, and when you look at STEM-related jobs or careers, it's less than 30%. So to illustrate your points and the actions you're undertaken to collaborate with businesses to have better connections and ensure employability or high employability, including the companies that are seeking this kind of talent. So how can this be done beyond Brazil? How can you extend this to the rest of the region? And how can this be coupled with other programs, either on the government or private sector side? Well, the data are very important because today we have about half non-STEM jobs with women. And in the future, the idea is for these STEM jobs. So that's what we need to work on to make sure that in 100 years' time, things will be better. But when we look at the links to companies, I think it starts with a word that is education. Today, we have a culture in Latin America, and here we have a large group of women, though we're not in the majority. We here express a job market that pushes us out. We can't be mothers. We can't have our specifically female or women-related features because that doesn't tie in with the market or its requirements. And that has to do with a culture, which takes a long time to change, but you need to start somewhere. So under Reprograma, and this is an idea, offer training in diversity, inclusion, and equity. And this is 1-to-1, because when you place a transsexual woman in an environment that is all male and cis male, and it's always been that way, those men need to understand how to relate to these people as well. So it's not just about putting the woman there, it's about creating an environment that will allow them to stay on. And there are companies that have reached out to these women, and we started to work and learn and, find ways for these companies to accommodate these people. And of course, the idea is for them to be able to stay on and not to leave after 2 or 3 years. When we worked on the data on STEM graduate women, what's going on then? So we are getting the education right, as Irene said, but we're not achieving the ultimate goal, which is to ensure the true, real presence of women, not just as part of building a society with an economy that accommodates women, but also it's about building technology for the future, because we do believe that women are not participating in the construction of what we are going to build, and that's very important.
Un poco viendo.
Tell us a specific, in the case of Reprograma, because there are a lot of initiatives like this one throughout the region, but in the case of Reprograma, right from the start, right when Reprograma was being designed, you have worked with Afro-descendants, you have worked with the LGBTIQ plus population in Brazil and elsewhere. You have worked with populations that aren't necessarily in the lens of most initiatives. So could you share some stories with us? Tell us about other dimensions of diversity, other groups that we haven't mentioned. Yes, more than half of the women are Afro-descendants, and more than 20% of the women are transsexual. And that is difficult because, as you were saying, we're not seeing organizations that are all that focused. So we don't know how to do this. We don't know what the barriers are that are faced by these women. So we're learning by doing. But yes, we are very focused on those women who are not only experiencing a gender gap, but a deeper gender gap for those persons that are on the margin. In Brazil, that is the reality of all of Latin America too. So the initial idea of Reprograma, as you were saying, Irene, is to focus on these groups because these are groups that are basically outside of what is happening globally. Now, in terms of stories, things that have happened to us is, well, a couple of things. First of all, we in the programa, all of us, we're all women. And that is an example that we want to set for companies. So we work well. What we're doing is possible, and we're also reflecting what we believe in. So we are women, sometimes we are cisgender or transsexual, and we work on all dimensions. We work on teaching, we do administrative functions, and that is because we want to inspire the women who are studying under us, so that they can take a job thinking that that is possible. Now, in women that are transsexual, I said that more than 10% of them are transsexual. And that is a very long road. And we need to adapt many things so as to be able to include these women. For example, in terms of registering for training, we have to eliminate the part of the video. Data shows that only 4% of transsexual persons are formally employed. So this isn't something that we see in the job market. It's not easy to find. In other words, we're not finding these people every day of the week. So we have to leave behind our personal experience leading a privileged life to step into reality, seeing how can we include these people. And that reality is including women in the world of technology. So the truth is we have many women who talk to us when we're giving our boot camps. That is an 18 or 12-week training session, and there we focus entirely on technology. And many of these women say, this is a change of life. It's not just changing my economic possibilities. It is a complete change. They are in a place where they feel welcome. They feel that they are even loved because the market often pushes them aside. And this is a space where they are being shown opportunity. That too reflects how these people feel. Maybe the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, I was telling them that they should measure using the cultural satellite account. And I think that that is something called for by UNESCO. It's an initiative that goes back some 10 years. And I'll tell you why we have to measure, because these are printed books, these are performing arts, things that have digital content, activities of cultural dissemination. And these indicators were down minus 7% in terms of the GDP. So my consideration is if governments cannot measure diversity using technology, they should do that through the current account as proposed by UNESCO. And my question for you, Tainara, is in Brazil, what do you do in terms of public policy to facilitate funding? Because often that involves a lot of red tape. And Irene, what are the facilities in IDB Lab to provide legal counsel and perhaps to be able to find a way of funding civil society? Thank you. And your name? Eric González. Eric, well, thank you. This whole matter of public policy is a very important one because we talk about companies and the IDB, et cetera. But if we're going to talk numbers for the program, these are very good numbers, but they're not enough. And the problem is a big one. When you talked about Mexico, and the same thing can be found in Brazil, we in public policy making, and unfortunately that changes a lot because administrations change, and this type of change is often a structural change and is long term. But you're right. In the case of Brazil, we're seeing how we can connect to the ministries that have an impact on our area of work. That's technology, employment, diversity, so that we can see, first of all, what we already have, because creating this takes years and years, but what we already have to support what we're already doing. That could be federal, local policies. In the case of Brazil, it's also states and municipal policy. So these entities can provide not only money, but also act as a network. When we talk about public schools, that is a way of reaching a lot of girls that are in these groups, and they cannot go to the major universities. So we need to work closely with the government. This is a major topic, of course, but we have to work with the policies already on the books so as to make good use of them and to help build the future of public policy that will reflect what civil society is already doing. Civil society can inform what is happening on the ground so the government can hear from civil society, and in that way project what is being done across the entire country. So our idea is to take that first step and to think that in the future we need to dovetail with public policy so that we can make good use of what we have already done. And we can work with the technical people that are working in the areas of concern to us. Now, also in view of the institutional strategy of the IDB group, and that strategy is going to be presented to the governors here at this meeting, one of the aspects of the strategy is to encourage synergies between the public arm, the private arm, which is IDB Invest, of the IDB group. And in this specific case, we have the leader, Fernando Regalia, of the social sector. And in IDB Lab, we are like a testing ground. We are an observatory for these new approaches. We have programs that the public sector may not yet be able to try, but we can see whether or not there is a deep-rooted impact. What happens with diversity? What happens with the employability, with the income level of these people? And then with public policies, can we put into place mechanisms to finance projects like this or to support them? In the case of Brazil, also working with a program for the ECTEC Foundation with the Lehman Foundation's backing. We are coordinating all of this so as to have a lasting impact. Now, the concrete question that you asked me, you said, how from IDB Lab can we support aspects having to do with corporate governance? Beyond classic corporate governance, that depends on the degree of readiness of the operations we finance. We finance projects between 150,000 to 5 million. We make small investments in startups. Often companies aren't ready for larger operations, but we work on things starting with design for entrepreneurial undertakings. For example, in the digital programming area, there has to be a component of corporate management. Used to, that didn't exist. It was only social or environmental considerations. So now we have to take into account governance too. We don't want to have bad effects because of biased data or because the recommendations have been out of line. But what we have now is tools, and this is a program called Fair LAC, L-A-C, and those programs are open source. So if you founded a company, if you're an investor, you can use these tools to find support. It is a type of support, and then we have more hands-on programs, like I mentioned initially when I talked about diversity with Diversity DC, where we are more involved in training to generate more diverse teams. And these efforts plant the seeds of future entrepreneurship.
Atrás. No quiero. Tenemos un.
So I think that we have a proximity bias. I keep recognizing people in the front rows. Quick questions, and I would say to both of you, my name is Cristina Puig, and I come from Spain. Now, Reprograma, the women, your program, you take them from one point, but my question goes way back. What happens to those boys or girls, these young people that do not reach that point? Often it's not that, well, they think that they cannot benefit from a STEM program. Often they do not have the reading, the mathematic capabilities to reach that level. So my question is, are you looking at that population, the population that's not ready to receive the training? And Irene, perhaps when you talk about ELITEC, you may talk about that, but does the IDB have a program? Does it have an investment facility for this type of solution? Something that goes way back. If we want these boys and girls to be able to be in a position to go to a boot camp that could change their lives, what happens if they drop out of school after grade 6? Thank you, Cristina. We only have 2 minutes left, so if you have questions, we can stay behind after we adjourn. But yes, it's important to think about that, because the truth is, many of these young people will not reach the level where training can be provided, and that's why we said it was 100 and some years, but we would have to wait. But often when people reach our programs, they don't have the basics. So we're trying to incorporate other things along the way to make certain that these women will be there so that we will not neglect them. Because if we begin with girls today, they will be fine in the future. But there are other gaps, and we would need 5 hours to talk about these gaps. They're regional, there are gaps in funding, there are problems with the schools. Some girls in our programs had to borrow a computer, and then they would have to go somewhere where they could get a signal to connect. So this is a major challenge, and we are trying to have influence on the parts that we can correct. Very quickly, obviously, from the public side, we have social programs focusing on those early stages. We at IDB Lab can't spread ourselves too thin. We would like to scale up so as to have greater impact. So we are focused on the programs I just described, but we realize that there is a lot that we're not addressing.
Minute left to say thank you to all of you. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
So thank you. I wanted to thank Flavia Milano. I thank our panelists. Once again, a round of applause, please. A very interesting topic, talking about civil society. This brings us to the end of the first seminar. So please register to get information on scholarships, Also, so you can hear about competitions, we want to thank the different organizations in attendance. Also, we thank our panelists for being with us today and those who are with us over the live stream. We will be back in this same meeting because we are going to begin at 1:30 a session opening the seminars. Lunch will be served in the Santa Fe room. Thank you.
Base de un desarrollo sostenible para todos. Juntos, sigamos haciendo historia.
El proyecto que tenemos aquí detrás es un financiamiento que otorgamos a una cooperativa de ganaderos del sur para, a través del programa de empresariado social, aumentar la capacidad de mercadear sus productos. Con un financiamiento de $1 millón estamos apoyándoles para que ellos adquiriesen una planta con cierta tecnología, digamos, tradicional que le permita a ellos procesar sus productos lácteos y poder almacenarlos para alcanzar mercados más allá de los tradicionales.
Bueno, cuando el BID nos apoyó, teníamos alrededor de, creo que 500 y algo. Y ahora estamos en creo que en los 800 y pico de productores.
Antes yo solo era estudiante de educación y gracias a COPESUR, a través del BID, hice una carrera técnica por el Infotec en técnico agrícola. La estabilidad que me ha dado ahora, he comprado varios pedacitos de tierra y lo tengo sembrándole comida, pasto y maíz a la vaca para seguir produciendo mejor.
Yo como nuevo socio exhorto a los demás productores, sean jóvenes, a que se integren a nosotros, a COPESUR, porque es una planta que tiene un gran futuro por delante.
I'm here to invite you to join us in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, from March 6th to March 10th for the IDB and IDB Invest annual meetings. This will be historic. For the first time ever, we will have 3 transformational changes: IDB Lab, IDB Invest, and the Institutional Strategy. Please join us in this historical moment where we will hopefully change the IDB, but also change the region for the future. See you in Punta Cana or via our live broadcast.
Cada fin de semana tenía más clientes, tenía que crecer y necesitaba de una ayuda. Y Fondo Esperanza tuvo toda la confianza.
Yo necesitaba un apoyo económico para poder emprender. Yo compré la primera radiofrecuencia y así fue como de una paciente terminé atendiendo 10, 12 pacientes en un día. Creo que se me dio la oportunidad de volver a nacer y hacer un sueño realidad.
Esto ha sido para mí momentos de pura alegría, muchas satisfacciones, muchos logros que jamás en la vida yo pensé que los iba a hacer.
Yo le diría a la Araceli del inicio que lo logró, que confíe en ella, porque va a llegar a donde ella quiere.
El impacto que ha recibido la ciudad por estos buses eléctricos ha sido grande, pues ha disminuido mucho el ruido y la contaminación ambiental.
Me gusta mucho el tema del Wi-Fi, que ya no hay ruido dentro del bus, entonces puedo disfrutar mi música.
Las sillas ergonómicas en la cabina son muy cómodas. Los pedales, la aceleración, por lo que son buses automáticos, son muy cómodos.
Como ciudadana de Bogotá, es muy importante que ya seamos la segunda ciudad del mundo con la mayor flota eléctrica. Me siento muy orgullosa de ser bogotana y de tener estos buses en nuestra ciudad.
Las Islas Galápagos, en Ecuador, son un tesoro de biodiversidad y un paraíso natural único en el mundo. Para mantener la belleza de este patrimonio de la humanidad, es vital trabajar en la reducción de la huella de carbono causada por las actividades humanas en el archipiélago.
Tenemos también experiencia y registros de lo que ha pasado cuando ha habido contaminación, derrames e incluso el día a día, ¿no? La contaminación de las embarcaciones, desde la más chiquita hasta la más grande, y cómo los combustibles fósiles tienen un gran impacto, ¿no? Eso se puede medir, se ha medido, existen los estudios en la bahía, cómo afecta a las poblaciones de lobos marinos, las tortugas, las iguanas y todas las aves marinas que se alimentan del mar.
Para construir un futuro sostenible para las islas, el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo ha acompañado al Ministerio de Energía y Minas del Ecuador durante todo el proceso de diseño del Plan de Transición Energética de las islas, brindando su apoyo a través de su conocimiento técnico y experiencia en la región.
Desde el punto de vista turístico, muchos turistas nos preguntan qué tipo de energía ustedes tienen, o sea, de dónde viene, y les contamos, ¿no? Y dicen, bueno, qué interesante que haya algo de renovable, pero creo que la experiencia del visitante sería como un poco mejor si ellos supieran que el hospedaje, que los negocios locales están utilizando más energía renovable. Creo que en general sería bueno para cómo se ve el destino, siendo que el turismo es la principal actividad económica.
Con metas claras, el plan propone la inversión en tecnologías renovables para la generación de energía eléctrica, como generadores eólicos que aprovechan la energía del viento o plantas fotovoltaicas que usan la energía solar. En las islas, actualmente el transporte es responsable del 70% de las emisiones de gas de efecto invernadero, siendo el transporte marítimo el principal contribuyente. En este sentido, se plantea la necesidad de implementar opciones de movilidad sostenible, como la movilidad eléctrica, que permita reemplazar el uso de combustibles fósiles por fuentes de energía renovable y limpia, incluyendo el hidrógeno verde como vector energético alternativo.
Teniendo el nombre de Galápagos, ya llamamos la atención de todo el mundo. Somos ya pioneros en contar con el primer parque eólico del Ecuador. Entonces, podemos seguir siendo algo emblemático a nivel mundial, fomentando la energía renovable. ¿Por qué es importante? Porque cuidas tu atmósfera, cuidas tu mundo, algo que, como sabemos, el cambio climático se está dando bruscamente, y es porque no lo estamos cuidando. Estamos emitiendo toneladas de CO2 a lo loco por la gran industria, y como estamos creciendo hasta poblacionalmente aquí en Galápagos también, soñamos con tener nuestras casas que ya produzcan energía renovable. Nosotros ya usemos con paneles solares, ya tenemos nuestros edificios que están